All right, so this is we're doing comparative politics today. Our goal is to talk about uh, the Southern strategy in the context of a definition of interest groups and political parties. And then also we want to frame our discussion around the political interest of what we identify as the Black political agenda. This is Dr. Lee Jones on the line with you. Thank you for joining. Let's go ahead and start. When we talk about interest groups, remember we are engaged this semester in doing what we call descriptive political science. Descriptive political science is concerned with, it is obsessed with defining terms. Remember that we use words to signify our reality. So if we are able to define the words that we use, then we are able to define our reality. And once you can define your reality, you can attempt to control it. So the effort to define our terms here is really fundamentally important, not only to our political understanding, but also to our human understanding. All right, so the phrase interest groups is used to describe an organization of individuals or institutions. These people wind up being united or called into action together by their shared ideology, by their shared interests, by their shared opinions. And these folks are organized together with the ultimate goal to influence the politics of the day. In the best case scenario, an interest group is looking to influence elections so that it can get its favorite candidates elected into office, so that that candidate is in a position to vote favorably on policies that the interest group supports, right? So interest groups are looking to influence the outcome of elections. That means that they are marshaling their money together. Interest groups are looking to influence political campaigns for office. Interest groups are looking to influence the development of the law. The ultimate goal of an interest group that is so, ordered is to influence the development of benefits, right? Influence the allocation of benefits. What we have said in this class is that politics is about power. We've also said power is the ability to influence choice. And we've said that the choices that matter are those that deal with the allocation of scarce resources. So what are we talking about? Allocation of scarce resources. We're talking about benefits being distributed to people. All right, that's good enough for that. All right, now let me introduce you to a few people. Every time we talk about interest groups, I like to introduce folks to a couple of people who framed my understanding of what it means to be in an interest group in the context of the civil rights movement. This person here, this is Kwame Ture, or Kwame Ture, that was his name when I met him, but Kwame Ture in the 1960s is better known as Stokely Carmichael, right? In particular, in 1966, Stokely Carmichael was the chairman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or he was the chairman of SNCC. You'll remember that your university sits on, I think what's the name of the street, right? It's not Fair Street anymore. It's called Student Activism Boulevard or something like that, right? So when the name of the street was changed, I remember being out there. It was a large press conference, and they had old school civil rights activists on the street on your university, reminiscing and thanking the youth for being recognized and such, right? So in 1966, Stokely Carmichael became responsible for popularizing the term Black Power. Popularizing the term, not originating the term. The person who originated the term, who first coined the term Black Power, that man's name is Mukasa Dada, the African Mukasa Dada, the revolutionary. Back when he was known as Willie Ricks. You see here on your, I don't know what the short afro on the side. Let me see. Right here, this is Willie Riggs. Here is Stokely Carmichael. And then maybe you know this person, one of the most famous, one of the most influential human beings of the 20th century. That's Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., right? So now, all of these people are public figures. You can look them up yourself. But why I am speaking to them is in the late 1980s, when I was in my undergraduate years, Kwame Ture led a study group on the campus of Clark Atlanta University. And I'm proud to say that I was a participant and I sat at his feet, where he would have us attempt in our young minds to think deep thoughts about the nature of decolonization, about the responsibility to be concerned with anti-racism. And one of the things that Kwame Ture would tell us is you have to organize. You have to organize yourself into a group in order to press your claims. You have to organize and call each other together so that you can work together under a unified thought in order to get the things that you want out of the society. Every time you shook Kwame Ture's hand, he would say, you would say humble, hello, sir, how are you? And he would say, hello, where is your organization? Where is your organization? Where is your organization? That was his mantra to us in the late 1980s. Now, let's think about why we should be concerned with the nature of organization, of interest group organization. Kwame Ture helps tell us that the reality of American politics is pluralism. Every time you see the word pluralism, in particular on the next two tests that you have coming up, every time you see the word pluralism, I want you to think about interest group competition. Pluralism is interest group competition. Pluralism says that this is a wide-ranging country with a lot of different political interests, and people will organize themselves based on their similar ideological disposition towards that interest group, and then those interest groups will be in conflict with each other. So interest group competition is the reality of American politics. So that is to say that the reality is that a political leadership in this country is designed to be responsive to the competition of people that are organized into groups to press their claims against each other. The undercurring supposition, right, the predicate supposition of that sentence there is to say, if you do not join an interest group, then the political leadership of the country is not designed to be responsive to you. Point blank, period. And if you do not have an organization of individuals to help you press your claims, then you are not necessarily a beneficiary of American society. You are a victim of the political process. If you cannot organize, you cannot gather resources. If you cannot gather resources, then you cannot have power. And he who does not have power is a slave, because that person has his lifestyle, has his life determined for him. Let's listen to a bit of Malcolm X. When I'm doing this in class, I always play a shade of Malcolm X. I hope what I'm getting ready to do doesn't sound too goofy on this recording, but I wanted to try it anyway. Here is Malcolm X describing to us the nature of politics and why we should not be political chumps.
And black victims of Americanism are waking up, and they're gaining a new political consciousness, becoming politically mature. And as they develop this political maturity, they're able to see the recent trends in these political elections. They see that the whites are so evenly divided that every time they vote, the race is so close, they have to go back and count the votes all over again. And which means that any minority that has a block of votes that stick together is in a strategic position. Either way you go, that's who gets it. You're in a position to determine who will go to the White House and who will stay in the doghouse. You're the one who has that power. You can keep Johnson in Washington, D.C., or you can send him back to his Texas cotton patch. sent Kennedy to Washington. You're the one who put the present Democratic administration in Washington, D.C. The whites were evenly divided. It was the fact that you threw 80% of your votes behind the Democrats that put the Democrats in the White House. When you see this, you can see that the Negro vote is the key factor. And despite the fact that you are in a position to be the determining factor, what do you get out of it? The Democrats have been in Washington, D.C. only because of the Negro vote. They've been down there 4 years. And then all other legislation they wanted to bring up, they brought it up and gotten it out of the way, and now they bring up you. And now they bring up you. You put them first and they put you last. Because you're a chump. Political chump. In Washington, D.C., in the House of Representatives, there are 257 who are Democrats. Only 177 are Republicans. In the Senate, there are 67 Democrats. Only 33 are Republicans. The party that you back controls 2/3 of the House of Representatives and the Senate, and still they can't keep their promise to you. Because you're a chump. Anytime you put your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it made to you during election time, and you're dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race. And what kind of alibi did they come up with? They try and pass the buck to the Dixie Trans. Now, during the days when you were blind, deaf, and dumb, ignorant, listening, and immature, naturally you went along with that. But today, as your eyes come open and you develop political maturity, you're able to see and think for yourself. And you can see that a Dixie Trans is nothing but a Democrat in disguise. You look at the structure of the government that controls this country. It's controlled by 16 senatorial committees and 20 congressional committees. Of the 16 senatorial committees that run the government, 10 of them are in the hands of Southern segregationists. Of the 20 congressional committees that run the government, 12 of them are in the hands of Southern segregationists. And they're going to tell you and me that the South lost the war.
A little bit of Malcolm X for us on the day. I hope that wasn't too long of an extended quote, but I wonder, how are you living if you can't spare, I ask this of myself, how you living if you can't spare 4 minutes for Malcolm X? Malcolm X here is telling us that you have to vote, you have to organize in order to vote your own political interests. If you do not press your political claims against the claims of others, then you are a political chump. You are voting and you are not getting, the government to be responsive to the things that help you lead a better life, to help you live your life. We live in a country that says it adheres to some fundamental values, and those values are built into the base, the bottom documents of the United States, the U.S. Constitution in particular. The preamble to the U.S. Constitution has these proud, bold words. The Constitution, the preamble starts off by saying, "We the people, in order to form a more perfect union." How about that? Well, in June of 2015, after this pool party, this young girl, 13 years old, was, essentially what you've got here is the police kneeling on a half-naked 13-year-old. I wonder what you see when you see this picture. What's the first thing that comes to your mind? If the first thing that comes to your mind is, oh, what did she do wrong? Then perhaps you have some soul searching to do. Is this a country that proclaims the benefits of we the people? The Declaration of Independence, authored by that enslaver Thomas Jefferson, the Declaration of Independence says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." Really? Well, in that same summer, 2015 June, here you have another 12-year-old being accosted, being abused by the police officers after another pool party, right? And this 12-year-old had her jaw broken and her ribs fractured. The 14th Amendment to the US Constitution, the famous 14th Amendment, says that if you are under the jurisdiction of American law, then you are due the equal protection of American law. The 14th Amendment says is where we find the equal protection clause. Again, in 2015, here you have Freddie Gray. The police, with the official account, would have us believe that when he was arrested, he was put in the back of some type of paddy wagon style van, and he was thrashing himself about in the back of the van such that his spine was severed 80%, such that he had his larynx crushed. How is this possible in the so-called land of the free and the home of the brave? I put it to you like this, because when you think about organizing in interest groups, while some communities might be able to merely think about, other things, right? For Black communities, part and parcel to the Black political agenda, we have to be concerned with certain elemental relationships inside our communities. And what is the most fundamental relationship? One of the most fundamental relationships are our relationships with the police. Now, I turn to this question. This is one of those questions that you're likely to see on the test. I want to ask you, please, what are some of the things that protects your rights inside the U.S. Constitution? Well, let's turn our attention. In the last week, we did some Constitution work. Here, let's pay some attention to the Bill of Rights. You'll remember the Bill of Rights the Bill of Rights was in the compromise that the Bill of Rights represents was inspired by George Washington, right? And then it's left up to James Madison, the father of the Constitution, to pull together, not to write, but to pull together the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights is ratified as an addendum to the US Constitution in 1791. And inside the Bill of Rights, the goal of the Bill of Rights, as articulated by the anti-federalists, the goal of the Bill of Rights is to protect the American people from an abusive government, to protect the American people from being abused by their government. Let's pay some attention to some of these elements in the Bill of Rights that supposedly protect our rights in the United States. Let's turn our attention to the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment to the Constitution protects us against unreasonable search and seizure except upon probable cause and a warrant. The Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable search and seizure. The Fifth Amendment has numerous things in it. Inside the Fifth Amendment, we see that we are protected against double jeopardy. You shouldn't be charged twice for the same crime. We also see that the Fifth Amendment protects us from being a witness against ourselves or from self-incrimination. That means we have the right to remain silent. But then remember, earlier in the semester, we talked about the Enlightenment period. We talked about Thomas Jefferson. You remember we were doing some philosophy in chapter 4. Remember that Thomas Jefferson gets credit with bringing the notion of inalienable rights to the U.S. Constitution, to the Declaration of Independence, and that he received that notion of inalienable rights from the Second Treatise on Government, the book written in the 1600s by philosopher John Locke. Well, what we have here in the Fifth Amendment is another articulation of these inalienable rights, where the Fifth Amendment says no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of the law. So in the Fifth Amendment, we also see the due process clause, where the due process clause means that everyone, rather the government, has a responsibility to protect citizens' rights, that there should be one set of laws for everyone in the country. The due process clause says that if you are in charge of implementing American law, then you must follow the law yourself. Let's turn our attention to the Sixth Amendment. It does say you have the right to a speedy and public trial. It does say you have the right to an impartial jury. But we turn our attention to the last part of the Sixth Amendment, where the Sixth Amendment says you have a right to an attorney for your defense. The famous court case, Gideon, the famous court case Gideon versus Wainwright, the Supreme Court famously says that if you are too poor to defend yourself, that you are not too poor to fall out of the protection of the Bill of Rights. And so the Supreme Court, Gideon versus Wainwright, says that that the state has a responsibility to provide a lawyer for someone who is too poor to hire their own lawyer. Let's turn our attention to the Eighth Amendment. Nothing wrong with the Seventh Amendment, but we're talking about the protections that are built in the Constitution for those who are criminally accused. We go to the Eighth Amendment. The Eighth Amendment does say you're protected against excessive bail. The Eighth Amendment does say you're protected against excessive fines. But for our purposes today, we're paying attention to the Eighth Amendment, where it says you're protected against cruel and unusual punishment. Cruel and unusual punishment. You have to ask yourself, there's a certain irony when you think about police brutality, right? That the police officers who brutalize unarmed people, they typically are, they're typically not arrested, right? Because, it's a rough job being a police officer, and American society believes that police officers have a strong right to return home to their families, and that does make sense, and that is true. However, in these cases, the courts are, lawyers are able to be hired by the people who have the families of those who have been abused, and they are able to pressure the state or the city such that they are receiving settlements, right? And so why is the state and the municipality paying the family of people who have been cruelly abused by law enforcement when the law enforcement officers themselves are not necessarily held to account? That is because of your 14th Amendment and your 8th Amendment. Let's go back to the 8th Amendment, where the 8th Amendment says you are protected against cruel and unusual punishment. Being beaten to death by the police is a form of cruel and unusual punishment. And because you have that protection in the Constitution, these families wind up being protected, or not being protected, able to reach settlements with the state. All right, that's the 8th Amendment. We just did Amendments 4, 5, 6, and 8. Let's turn our attention again to the 14th Amendment. I want you to look at it with me. We're at the 14th Amendment here, part of those Reconstruction period amendments. The 14th Amendment says a few things here. The 14th Amendment says if you're born in the United States, you're a citizen of the United States. The 14th Amendment says citizens have rights. They're called privileges and immunities. The 14th Amendment, as we just saw in the 5th Amendment, the 14th Amendment says the states have a responsibility to protect those rights. That's called due process. And then, for our point for this chapter, the 14th Amendment has within it the Equal Protection Clause. The Equal Protection Clause. This means that if you are underneath the jurisdiction of American law, then you are due the equal protection of American law. In the last chapter, we went through the Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, Fair Housing Act, and we've touched upon, executive order signed by Kennedy that puts into law affirmative action and affirmative action policies that are expanded upon by Richard Nixon, of all people. So when I ask you, what are some of the laws, what are some of the things that protect your rights in the United States? One of the things I want you to think about here are these amendments, right? If someone is criminally accused, then amendments 4, 5, 6, 8, and 14 protect the rights of the criminally accused. Together, what do we have? Together, these protect the individual right against abuses of power by the state, and in that they apply to accused persons. These amendments are supposed to foster a sense of inclusiveness, fairness, and equality that are implicit in the modern dilemma of government, where the modern dilemma of government is the relationship, the conflict between freedom and equality. Freedom and equality. That's what I wanted to say about that. Now, we're at the half-hour mark, but I want to keep on going for a minute, because what I really intend for us to talk about in this chapter, there's some things that are put to you straightforward in the book, right? About interest groups and political parties. You've got that book. You should read through that chapter. You will get the point. However, what we do in class, I don't know about your other professors, but you know, this professor doesn't just stand there and read the book to you. I try to bring you a little something that the books will not have for you. And so what I'm bringing to you today here are rather the crimes of Dylann Roof. And we'll put this in the context of our interest group articulation and our elections. You know, June 17th in particular, June 2015, this white supremacist named Dylann Roof, he goes into Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina, and he goes there on Bible study day. And he goes in there and he is welcomed with open arms. And he goes in there and locks arms and prays with the people of that church. And then he pulls out his handgun and shoots and kills 9 members of that church. And one of those members was an alumnus of Clark Atlanta University, your university. The question becomes, why did he do this? And so, as these folks are wont to do, he put together some thoughts. The media calls it a manifesto, put it online, and what our responsibility to do is to read it and see what we can glean of it. So let's spend some time with his manifesto, and I want to point a little something out to you. Dylann Roof wrote that when he was thinking about racial conflict in the United States, he goes and does a web search. And he says, the first website I came to was the Council of Conservative Citizens. He said he saw their pages upon pages of brutal black on white murders, and he says he was in disbelief. He says this is when he realized that something was wrong. He asks himself, how could the news be blowing up the Trayvon Martin case while hundreds of these black on white murders got ignored? And he decides to go into that church and shoot 9 people. Now, because Dylann Roof says that he was motivated by a webpage by the thoughts of the Council of Conservative Citizens, then it makes sense for us to go ahead and investigate who this Council of Conservative Citizens are. Pulling from this New Yorker webpage, this group is based in Missouri, and its leader is a man named Earl Holt III. Reading from this article to you. This Earl Holt III has donated more than $10,000 to the presidential campaigns of Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, and Rick Santorum. And in a backup story, someone revealed that another 20 Republican politicians also received money from Holt. They included Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker and the U.S. Senators Joni Ernst of Iowa, Tom Tillis of North Carolina, Bill Cassidy, Tom Cotton, Paul Ryan. Paul Ryan of Wisconsin, when this article was written, Paul Ryan was Speaker of the House, the most powerful, at least the most powerful Republican at the time. All told, according to the author of this article, Holt, in recent years, has donated $74,000 to Republican candidates, more from that same article. According to Cohen, the ties between the Council of Conservative Citizens and the Republican Party persist. In 2004, his organization revealed that 38 politicians, the vast majority of them Republicans, including at the time the very famous South Carolina very famous Republican Haley Barbour, attended this Council of Conservative Citizen events in South Carolina. Members of the CCC participated in the political campaign to keep the Confederate flag flying from the dome. And more recently, in 2013, it emerged that prominent South Carolina Republican Garcia Quintana was a long-term member of the Council of Conservative Citizens, right? And so I'm pulling this together for you on purpose. And I didn't write this. This is from this article. Republican candidates and operatives who rely heavily on the votes of white Southerners, and in particular, Southern white men, have sometimes been driven to cultivate support amongst gun groups, amongst anti-immigrant groups, amongst so-called patriot groups, and other inflammatory organizations that cluster around the right fringes of their party and beyond. And when they aren't actively courting these entities, many prominent Republicans have been reluctant to say anything that could incur their wrath. What that then is in a roundabout way, an articulation of the Southern strategy. The Southern strategy, the supposition is that the Republican Party looks to gain support, in particular amongst white people in the South, by playing to the racial fears of white Southerners, okay? And that's where we'll end this recording. Hopefully that sounds like some type of a cliffhanger, and we'll pick this up in the next recording that I'll do with the next class. I'm going to stop the recording now.